In an industry where many brands try to be louder, trendier, and more visually aggressive, Uniqlo chose a completely different path. It sells plain t-shirts, simple jackets, basic jeans, thermal innerwear, and everyday clothing. No constant drama, no excessive hype, no need to turn every fashion season into a spectacle. And yet, this quiet-looking brand has become one of the strongest names in global fashion retail. But here is the important part. Uniqlo does not win because its simplicity is easy. Uniqlo wins because it turned simplicity into a system, a product system, a pricing system, an operating system, a brand system. And when you look closely, Uniqlo is not just selling basic clothes. It is selling a different kind of promise. Clothing does not have to make you louder. It has to make your everyday life easier. That is what Uniqlo calls LifeWear. Based on the source material, LifeWear is built around clothing designed to improve daily life, with a focus on usefulness, quality, versatility, and reasonable pricing for a broad customer base. And from that philosophy, Uniqlo has built one of the most interesting branding cases in modern fashion. To understand why Uniqlo is different, we first need to understand the industry it operates in. Fashion is an industry that is constantly pulled by what is new. New season, new collection, new color, new silhouette, new influencer, new collaboration, new trend. Many fashion brands compete by creating urgency. If you do not buy now, you might miss the moment. If you do not wear this, you might no longer look current. If you do not follow the trend, you might feel left behind. In that logic, the more noticeable a brand is, the better. The louder the identity, the better. The stronger the visual statement, the better. But Uniqlo went in a different direction. It does not try to turn customers into walking billboards. It does not build clothing as a loud declaration of personality. And it does not constantly push the idea that every season has to look completely different from the last. Instead, Uniqlo focuses on products that sound almost boring at first. Thermal innerwear, basic t-shirts, button-down shirts, puffer jackets, jeans, underwear, and everyday essentials. These products do not feel as glamorous as a runway show, but they have one massive advantage. Almost everyone needs them, and when almost everyone needs something, the brand that can solve that need better, more consistently, and more repeatedly has the chance to build a very durable business. That is the core tension of the Uniqlo case. In an industry obsessed with novelty, Uniqlo wins through repetition. In an industry that often sells the idea of standing out, Uniqlo sells the idea of dressing with less friction. In an industry chasing trends, Uniqlo built a system around products that may never look flashy, but can become deeply useful. And that is the strategy. The story began in 1984, when Tadashi Yanai opened the first Uniqlo store in Hiroshima. In 1991, the company changed its name to Fast Retailing, a name that already revealed a clear ambition. Not just to sell clothes, but to build a retail system with speed, scale, and the ability to expand. But Uniqlo did not become a global giant overnight. The brand had to learn from the market. It had to adjust. It had to go through difficult international experiments, especially in its early attempts in the United States. What matters is that Uniqlo did not abandon its strategic core. Instead of trying to become more fashionable in the conventional sense, Uniqlo slowly redefined what it wanted to be. It did not want to be just a place that sold affordable clothes. It wanted to become a place that sold everyday clothing solutions. That shift is critical. Selling affordable clothes is easy to copy. Competitors can lower prices. Competitors can expand fast. Competitors can launch new styles every week, but selling everyday clothing solutions is different. It requires each product to have a real reason to exist, not just attractive, not just cheap, not just easy to wear. It has to solve a specific problem in everyday life. When it is cold, clothing should help you feel warmer. When it is hot, clothing should help you feel cooler. When you layer clothes, they should feel lighter. When you go to work, school, travel, or walk around the city, the clothing should be easy to combine and easy to live in. Uniqlo identified the small frictions people experience when getting dressed every day. Then, it turned those frictions into product opportunities. And the biggest turning point was this: Uniqlo turned basic into technology. A normal, basic item can easily become a commodity. If a plain t-shirt is just a plain t-shirt, customers compare price, color, fabric, convenience, and then choose whatever feels easiest. But Uniqlo understood that if it wanted to build a long-term advantage, a basic product needed a stronger reason to buy. That is why HEATTECH and AIRism matter. HEATTECH is not just thermal innerwear. According to the source material, it was developed by Uniqlo together with Toray, launched in 2003, and described with features such as heat retention, odor control, anti-static performance, and comfort. AIRism is described by Uniqlo as a fabric technology designed to release moisture and heat, reduce stickiness, and help control odor. At first, this sounds like product information, but strategically, it is a very sharp move. Uniqlo is not saying, "Our clothes are more fashionable." It is saying, "Our clothes help you live more comfortably." That is a major difference. More fashionable is subjective. One person likes it, another does not. One season it works, the next season it might feel outdated. But warmer in cold weather, more comfortable in hot weather, and easier to wear every day are much more concrete benefits. Uniqlo takes some of the most ordinary items in a wardrobe and attaches clear functionality to them. That is how the product stops being just another basic item. It becomes a solution product. Simple on the surface, but with a clear reason to buy. This is why Uniqlo can repeat the same core product families for years without feeling stale in the usual way. Because each repetition is not just selling the same thing again. It is about improving material, refining fit, optimizing the experience, and strengthening the belief that if you need a reliable, everyday item, Uniqlo is a place worth considering. So, Uniqlo's simplicity is not a lack of creativity. It is creativity hidden beneath the surface. The clothes may look simple, but behind them are research and development, material partnerships, customer feedback, supply chain management, and large-scale production capabilities. According to the source material, HEATTECH was developed with more than 10,000 prototypes before launch. That number reveals something important. What looks simple on the outside can be deeply complex behind the scenes, and that is the art of Uniqlo. Not making products look complicated, but making them simple enough that customers do not have to think too hard when wearing them. If HEATTECH and AIRism are proof at the product level, LifeWear is how Uniqlo packages the entire strategy into a brand philosophy. LifeWear does not position clothing as a symbol designed to grab attention. It positions clothing as part of life. Something that serves the wearer, rather than forcing a strong brand attitude onto the wearer. According to the source material, Uniqlo emphasizes the spirit of made for all, and the idea that clothing should not impose the brand's personality onto customers, but should act as a component that helps people express themselves. That is a very interesting position. Many fashion brands sell identity. They tell you, Wear us to look cooler. Wear us to look more premium. Wear us to look younger. Wear us to look different. Wear us to become more visible. Uniqlo chooses a quieter role. But quieter does not mean weaker. Uniqlo behaves more like the basic infrastructure of a wardrobe. It does not try to take all the spotlight. It does not need every eye to focus on the logo. It does not need every product to be a statement. Instead, it wants to become something you can wear again and again, combine again and again, and use in many different situations without thinking too much. This is a different kind of power. Not the power of showing off, the power of being present often. A brand that is used every day can be stronger than a brand that is only discussed when a trend appears. A jacket worn to work, on weekends, while traveling, and on ordinary city walks for years may create deeper trust than a flashy item that dominates one season. Uniqlo understands this. Its products do not need to shout, "Look at me." They quietly say, "You can use me for a long time." And in a noisy consumer world, that quietness becomes a form of difference. Another important part of Uniqlo's model is pricing. Uniqlo is often seen as an accessible brand, but calling it simply cheap is not enough. Uniqlo's pricing strategy is not just about making the number lower, it is about creating a feeling of stability. Customers walk into Uniqlo and have a relatively clear expectation of what they will get. Basic products, stable quality, easy-to-wear design, and reasonable prices. That feeling reduces the risk of purchase. And in fashion retail, reducing purchase risk is a major advantage, because fashion often makes customers think too much. Will this go out of style? Is it easy to match? Is it worth the price? Will I wear it more than once? Am I buying this just because of a temporary emotion? Uniqlo answers those questions through consistency. The products are not too extreme. The prices are not too far out of reach. The styles are not too difficult to wear. The quality is positioned as reliable within its category. As a result, customers find it easier to buy the first time. More importantly, they find it easier to buy again. And this is one of the sharpest points. In fashion, repeat purchase can matter more than attention. A brand can go viral once, but if customers do not return, virality is only a spark. Uniqlo builds its model around returning customers. You buy HEATTECH this winter. If it works well, you may come back next winter. You buy AIRism this summer. If it feels comfortable, you remember it next summer. You buy a basic t-shirt. If the fit, fabric, and price feel right, the next time you may not need to test another brand. That is how Uniqlo turns pricing into a brand asset. Not the lowest price at all costs, but reasonable enough to reduce hesitation, stable enough to build trust, and repeatable enough to create habit. In a market where many brands use scarcity, hype, or high pricing to create a sense of specialness, Uniqlo builds the opposite feeling: accessible, understandable, and easy to return to. And that is a very difficult strategy to execute well. Because to offer reasonable prices while continuing to grow, the business must be extremely strong operationally. There is a common misunderstanding about Uniqlo. Because the products are simple, the business must also be simple. In reality, the opposite is closer to the truth. The simplicity customers see at the front only works because there is a strong system behind it. To sell basic clothing at reasonable prices on a global scale, Uniqlo needs material R&D. It needs a stable supply chain. It needs inventory management. It needs retail data. It needs disciplined product selection. It needs a clear store experience. It needs the ability to expand internationally without weakening the brand. So Uniqlo's simplicity is not about doing less. It is about removing what does not serve the strategy. It does not need too many logos. It does not need overly complicated messaging. It does not need to chase every trend. It does not need every product to become a fashion statement. Instead, Uniqlo focuses on practical questions. Does the wearer feel more comfortable? Can this item be used in many situations? Does the material solve a clear problem? Is the price reasonable enough for repeat purchase? Can the product be sold at scale? Does the message fit LifeWear? This is brand discipline, and this discipline creates an advantage that competitors cannot easily copy in a short time. Why? Because consistency cannot be faked in one campaign. You can hire an agency to create a beautiful campaign. You can make one viral video. You can launch one attention-grabbing collection. But to make customers believe you are a reliable place for everyday clothing, you have to prove it over many years. Through every product, every wear, every wash, every return visit, every winter, every summer. Uniqlo does not win through one explosive moment. It wins through a long sequence of things done well enough, again and again. One of the most important things to understand is Uniqlo's marketing. Uniqlo is not a silent brand, but its communication is usually not built on extreme noise. It does not build the entire brand around scandal, shock value, or chasing every trend at any cost. Instead, Uniqlo often talks about product, fabric, technology, clothing philosophy, and everyday usefulness. In other words, Uniqlo's marketing is closer to product marketing than hype marketing. That is a strategic choice, because if the brand is positioned around LifeWear, the communication has to support that feeling. If Uniqlo becomes too loud, too aggressive, too trend-obsessed, or too forceful, it may weaken the very idea of clothing for everyday life. This brand needs clarity more than excitement, trust more than short-term stimulation. It needs customers to understand what the product does, not just remember a catchy line. That is why Uniqlo's quieter approach can become an advantage. It makes the brand feel more mature, more disciplined, more trustworthy, and most importantly, it gives the product space to speak for itself. When HEATTECH genuinely helps people feel warmer, when AIRism genuinely feels comfortable in hot weather, when a basic t-shirt is genuinely easy to wear, customers do not need an overly complicated promise. The wearing experience becomes the marketing, and that is a very powerful form of marketing. Marketing confirmed by repeat purchase. Behind this strategy is the long-term role of Tadashi Yanai. According to the source material, Yanai is the founder and longtime strategic leader of fast retailing and Uniqlo. The company's history shows how he pushed the business from local retail toward a global model while maintaining strong strategic control. The key point is not only that he expanded Uniqlo, it is that he preserved Uniqlo's strategic center. Fashion is full of temptations. The temptation to chase trends faster, the temptation to make products more noticeable but less wearable, the temptation to move more premium to increase margins, the temptation to create scarcity to drive short-term demand, the temptation to change constantly in order to look new. Uniqlo does not ignore change. It still improves, collaborates, expands, and experiments with markets. But the strategic core remains clear. Serve everyday life with simple, useful, reliable clothing at reasonable prices. That decision is harder than it looks, because in an industry powered by newness, staying committed to the basics requires strong belief in the system. You have to believe that not every win comes from immediate attention. Some wins come from repeat behavior. Some brands do not need to be talked about every day. They just need to be inside people's wardrobes every week. Uniqlo is that kind of brand. If we only talk about philosophy, this can sound abstract, But the numbers show that the strategy is not just beautiful on paper. According to the source material, fast retailing reached consolidated revenue of 3.400 trillion yen in fiscal year 2025, up 9.6%, with operating profit above 551 billion yen, up 13.6%. Uniqlo International recorded revenue of 1.9102 trillion yen, up 11.6%, while Uniqlo Japan reached revenue of 1.026 trillion yen, up 10.1%. These numbers tell us something important. Uniqlo is not basic in the sense of being small, safe, or unambitious. It has turned basic clothing into a global growth platform. The more universal the product, the larger the market can become if the brand executes well. And when a brand can own a place in the repeated needs of daily life, it does not have to depend entirely on one seasonal trend. People may not buy a statement fashion piece every month, but they still need innerwear, thermal layers, t-shirts, easy pants, work clothes, travel clothes, and everyday essentials. Uniqlo enters those high-frequency needs, not by making them more complicated, but by making them more reliable. That is a major lesson about mass market opportunity. Sometimes the biggest opportunity is not in the strangest product, it is in the most familiar product, if you can make it better, more consistent, and easier to buy again at scale. From the outside, Uniqlo may look easy to copy. Sell basic clothes, use neutral colors, design minimalist stores, offer reasonable prices, talk about quality, but that is only the surface. The hard-to-copy part is the system underneath. You can copy a plain shirt, but it is much harder to copy years of material R&D. You can copy a minimalist store style, but it is much harder to copy price trust built through repeated purchases. You can say, clothes for everyone, but it is much harder to prove that if product, sizing, pricing, distribution, and customer experience do not work together. You can run one campaign about simplicity, but it is much harder to maintain that simplicity when growth pressure pushes you to add more, say more, and become louder. This is why Uniqlo is strong. It does not only have a positioning, it has an operating model that supports that positioning. LifeWear is not just brand language. It has to be proven through products, HEATTECH, AIRism, t-shirts, jackets, store experience, pricing, supply chain, repeat purchase, everyday usability. When positioning and operations match, the brand becomes much harder to shake. Because at that point, customers are not just hearing what you say, they are experiencing the promise in real life. And that is the deepest layer of branding. Not the logo, not the slogan, not the campaign, but a promise repeated enough times through actual experience. 5 practical lessons from Uniqlo. The first lesson: the more mass market a product is, the clearer the reason to buy must be. If you sell something many others can sell, you cannot rely only on beautiful or cheap. You need a more specific reason. HEATTECH is not just innerwear, it solves cold. AIRism is not just basic clothing, it solves heat, humidity, and discomfort. A basic product becomes powerful when it has a clear function in daily life. The second lesson: strong positioning does not always have to be loud. Uniqlo does not tell customers who they have to become. It chooses a more useful role, helping people dress more easily, live more comfortably, and combine clothing more simply. In many categories, "I help your life work better" can be stronger than "I make you stand out." The third lesson: price trust is a brand asset. When customers believe a brand consistently delivers fair value, they hesitate less and return more easily. Price is not just a number. Price is a repeated feeling of fairness. The fourth lesson: simplicity on the outside requires depth on the inside. A product that looks basic does not mean the business behind it is basic. To create trustworthy simplicity, Uniqlo needs research and development, materials, operations, scale, and brand discipline. Real simplicity is often the result of controlling many complex things very well. The fifth lesson: a durable brand does not always need to live on short-term explosions. Virality can create attention, but repeat purchase creates the foundation. Uniqlo shows that a quieter brand can still become powerful if product, pricing, distribution, and positioning all move in the same direction for many years. And that is why Uniqlo is such a valuable case study. Not because it makes simple fashion, but because it proves that simplicity can become a growth strategy when it is built on real products, real operations, and a consistent brand promise. Uniqlo does not try to be the loudest voice in fashion. It tries to be the brand customers can return to again and again without thinking too hard. And in business, that can be one of the most powerful positions of all. If you find the Uniqlo case interesting, look at a brand you are building, selling, or studying. Is it trying to get more attention? Or is it creating stronger reasons for customers to come back? Because sometimes, the strongest brand is not the one people look at once. It is the one people choose again and again.